Stanislaus is a place of true magic, right? It brings us here. It's magic as an ecosystem. It's magic as a home. Well, we're now turning to another place of true magic, the Klamath, which begins in Oregon near Crater Lake and runs southwesterly into California and empties into the Pacific Ocean at Requa, which is the home of one of our honored speakers tonight. Before Pacific Corps' predecessor built the dams, this river had the third largest salmon run on the West Coast. Indeed, many believe it was second only to the Columbia. And the people who lived in this place of magic depended upon the fish in many different ways, which they will describe. And then these dams were built beginning in 1918 through 1961, and that all changed. So when this story really begins in 2002, when this project came up for relicensing under the Federal Power Act, and the essential question was more of the same or a different future. And here is the different future. Just a few weeks ago, this is Copco number 1, the oldest of the dams, a test explosion in preparation for its being fully demolished this summer. Next slide. All of the reservoirs are drained. This is the river reemerging through a century of accumulated sediment behind Copco Dam. The future is going to be so different than the past century. We see the future coming back. And so, as I think about what we're about to hear, next slide. This famous picture, how do you get there from here? Let me give you a different metaphor. Pigs will fly when, right? We use that to say something is impossible. When this story began in 2002 with the relicensing of this project, most people believed that what you just saw would never happen. And so I just ask you to think from now on about of the saying, when pigs fly, with the second meaning, which is it's your job to make pigs fly, right? And that's what we're about to hear. And so I'm not going to say more, and instead welcome the Yurok and Karuk, who are two of the federally recognized tribes in the Klamath Basin, who are but for causes of this extraordinary outcome. I want them to tell the story, and before they do, I have one last slide, which is Troy Fletcher, screen right, the primary negotiator for Yurok through in the negotiations that resulted in the Klamath Hydro Settlement Agreement. He died in 2015. He's no longer with us, although I know he's smiling on this tonight. Troy, like the guests that we have tonight, are people who take great risk to make hard things happen. And with that, welcome.
How's everyone doing tonight? So this is a song of world renewal, and excuse me if it don't come out perfect. And whoa, hey, yeah, whoa, hey, yeah, whoa, hey, whoa, hey, hey, whoa, hey, whoa, hey, hey, whoa, hey, whoa. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah, oh, yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah, oh.
Yeah, you want to start over here, and then we'll go on there. Introduce yourself.
Waglasid Gaushasas Inglohuktanis Kamonkunk no Iwichkini Choimadakni. Hi, my name is H. Wilson. I'm Klamath and Modoc. I'm enrolled in the Klamath tribes, and I have a son named Kno Mortimer. He's not with me here, but he's my other piece of me that I wanted to introduce. And the name I shared with you is actually a Ponca, Oklahoma name too, and so that was some Ponca language in there. I'll pass it off.
And Ayukui Neknau, Sami Jinsaw, Rekwa, you may have met Chalk. I come from the village of Rekwa. I've dedicated my life to providing healthy opportunities for families living within the Klamath Basin, and I plan to continue to do that for the rest of my life.
Okay. Hi, my name is John Luke Jensa, or Ayukui, and I'm the media director for the Ancestral Guard, and I do take photos and promotions and stuff like that, and also, most importantly, I grew up on the Klamath River, and I know what it feels like to be affected by dams every day, and I know what it feels like to want to be a part of a healthy river, and I know that we're going to get that.
And my name is Craig Tucker. I'm a consultant. I've been working with Karuk and Yurok and tribes in the Klamath for about 20 years, and I couldn't leave because who could leave this kind of scene? So it's been a pleasure and honor to work with these guys for all these years. How do you guys want to start? Do you want to? You mean to start with the? Okay, the way we talked. Okay. I got to show you that one because it took me all Sunday afternoon to figure out how to make a fish swim in there. So we started, I was working at Friends of the River in 2002 when the fish kill happened on the Klamath, and I got real fascinated real quick. And I started going to relicensing meetings with my colleague Kelly Catlett at Friends of the River. And I met a woman named Ronnie Pierce, and she's also not with us anymore. Ronnie was a member of the Makah tribe, and she was the FERC person for the Klamath River Intertribal Fish and Water Commission, and she was about this tall, and she smoked too much, which was her undoing. But she was clearly the smartest person in the room at every one of those meetings. And she could say things that no one else could say. She was this older Native American woman. I couldn't tell if she was a biologist or an attorney or an engineer. She was covering all those bases. But she got mad and cussed out the guys from Pacific Corps and stormed out of the room in a meeting like she often did, and I followed her out. And I was like, hey, I know you don't know me, but I'm on your team. And I'm like, I think if you really want to pull off this dam removal, and she was the first person who actually would say it. Like no one else would say it. Like everybody was embarrassed. Like it was such a radical idea that people would laugh at us. People didn't want to say it, but she would say it. I'm like, I think, fiddler farting around here with FERC, and this is not how we're going to get there. Like, if we want to remove those dams, we're going to have to attack this company, like right at the company. And she's like, finally, one of you white guys figured out how this shit works. And she's like, I'm like, well, I think we should go to Scotland. This company's owned by a Scottish multinational energy company, and we should go to Scotland and take a tribal contingent over there and crash their shareholders meeting. She's like, obviously. And I was like, because I was thinking I had some brilliant idea. And she's like, if you'll get the money, I'll get the tribes on board. I'm like, deal. And so she was the first person, like, I didn't know anything. I'm from South Carolina. I didn't know anything about Indian country. And so I followed her up, and she introduced me to folks at Karuk, the Klamath tribes, Yurok tribe, and let me kind of make this pitch. And I will tell you, at the time, all the environmental groups I was working with thought I was crazy. Like, this guy is crazy. I don't know where you got this southern guy, but he is nuts. But every time I pitched it in the tribal communities, they were like, obviously, can you figure out how to get us over there? And so it was really, to me, a little bit of a match made in heaven. And I don't know why it worked, but in a lot of the environmental groups who really discouraged the work, years later, people come back around like, yeah, you guys are right. So I'm going to tell a little bit of that story, and it's a powerful story about how I think you really challenge power. And so
Mac person Craig, come here for just a minute. Get me back to full screen here.
all right, I think he's got to punch his little green button right here, man.
Okay, and then you want me to
Yeah,
in advance for you?
there you go. You can go a couple slides.
Right here?
Yeah, so Klamath Basin's really big. It's 12,000 square miles. It spans Oregon, California. I think there's 8 counties, a bunch of jurisdictions. There's 6 fairly recognized Indian tribes. I think there's 3 not recognized tribes. And apologies to my Yurok colleagues, but the red is Karuk's Aboriginal territory, which is about 1 million acres. The one thing I say about Klamath, it is like a really fascinating place. The upper basin's a volcanic desert landscape, really dry, but this whole upper basin drains into what was called the Everglades of the West. Is massive wetlands, one of the big 3 areas for the Pacific Flyway. This is the homelands of the Klamath, the Modoc, Paiute, Yuskin Band, and Snake River Indians, which are have a shared government called the Klamath Tribes. So when we talk about Klamath Tribes, we're talking about an official tribal government and entity. As you come downriver, this is Shasta territory. As you come downriver, you get into Karuk territory, and then the Yuroks along the lower 45 miles of the Klamath, and the Hoopa reservations on the Klamath's biggest tributary, which is the Trinity. This is Indian country, and this is like a very ethnically, culturally diverse place. These tribes all speak languages from different linguistic groups. It's a very unique place, and I would say it's one of the darkest places from space in America, one of the lowest population densities in America. The biggest metropolitan area is Klamath Falls, which is not very impressive. So it's a very remote, unique place. And when I was working on the Delta, I was like, I don't know if I can fix the Delta, but I'm like, Klamath? It looks like that place is pretty intact. Next slide. And I would just say on the Klamath, I don't know what the right way to say this is, but I always say it's like the tribes are really culturally intact. And what I mean when I say that is like Karuks, Yuroks, Hoopa, their language, their basketry, traditional fishing practices, ceremonies. It's just like a normal way of life. It's just like kids get out of school to go to ceremony. It's just really part of the fabric of the place in a way that I haven't seen in other parts of the lower 48. Is that fair? Is that reasonable? All right. It's always not sure how to say that sometimes. So do a lot of things, but the big thing is they cut the basin in half. So it's an hourglass-shaped basin. The dams are in the skinny part of the basin. There's about 400 miles of historical salmon spawning and rearing habitat. And all the cold water, not all, but most of the cold water springs are up here. This is a big volcanic system. A lot of cold water up here, and that's sort of that resiliency piece you're going to get in the age of global warming. I don't want to talk about that. Oop, wrong way. So the other thing these dams do is they trap hyper-eutrophic water. So the upper basin's volcanic, it's full of nitrogen, phosphorus. They pulled out all the wetlands to grow potatoes. And so the water that comes downriver is really loaded in nutrients. It gets trapped behind these dams. It's really hot, and you have these massive blooms of algae. And this is what you're looking at right here is a massive bloom of Microcystis aeruginosa. It is a very toxic algae, secretes a compound called microcystin, which is a liver toxin, and it's like 4,000 times higher than what the World Health Organization deems safe for human contact. So when we started taking water samples and sending them away, we got these phone calls like, we don't know you got that water, but do not touch it. And so these things, it was really kind of off the hook what was going on here in terms of water quality impairments. And it's another shot of that. Next slide. So we decided we better remove some of these dams and solve these problems. The lower 4 dams of the Klamath River, you've got Iron Gate Dam, which is closest to I-5. It's just on the east side of I-5. As you go upriver, you get Copco 1, Copco 2, and then in Oregon, you get J.C. Boyle. For you guys who like to run Hell's Corner, this is the dam that diverted the water, flumed most of the river, dropped it through a powerhouse, and where that dropped back into the river is where the Hell's Corner run starts. Next slide. And so this is J.C. Boyle. Next slide. We actually already removed the dam. This is Copco 2. It got yanked out this summer and immediately looks like a river. I mean, it went from this sort of, you can see the green color of the water up there in the top slide. You take out the dam, water quality almost improved overnight, it seemed like. Next slide. This is Copco. This is probably the tallest and most complicated of the dams to remove. It's in this really tight river canyon. Upstream of Copco is Ward's Canyon, really narrow river canyon. I think it's going to be good for river rafting soon. Next slide. And this is Iron Gate. So this is the one that's closest to I-5. It's probably the most massive of the dams. It's 173 feet tall, a big earth rock structure. And you can't quite see it, but the spoils pile is over here, and they're just going to remove it and put the rock right back in the ground where they got it from, which I love. Keep going. Next slide. I think I'll let Sammy talk about this stuff, so let's just go to the next slide. Next slide. And so the reason why we're removing dams, I tell you what the dams do, but it's what they don't do is why they're coming out. And so they block 350 miles of habitat, they degrade water quality, these big algae blooms, they limit the run diversity, so they snuffed out spring run Chinook salmon almost entirely when they built Iron Gate Dam. Next slide. But this is why they're coming out, it's because of what they don't do. They don't make a lot of money for Pacificor, they don't provide any irrigation diversions, and they don't provide flood control. And so these are the things we really got focused on in the dam battle, is like talking about what the dams don't do. Next slide. But the company was adamant, they wanted to relicense the dams. And so I could talk for a long time about this, but the thing that I was really involved in, the piece of this that I was really involved in, was how do we get this company come to the table and negotiate the deal? And so it was a battle. It was a pitched battle. We went to Scotland 3 times and crashed shareholders meetings. We thought we were going to win right there in Scotland. They ended up selling the company to Berkshire Energy.
Test.
So
It looks like it, yeah.
So we went to Scotland. They sold it to Berkshire Energy. I was devastated. Thought I was throwing my career away, tilting at a windmill. I remember calling Leif Hillman and saying, "Hey, I have bad news. They sold the dams. They sold it to Warren Buffett." And Leif was like, "Where does that guy live?" And so I'm like, "Omaha." He's like, "Well, it'd be easier to get to than Scotland." And so it was like, So I'm like, okay. So we started going to Omaha, Nebraska, and crashing the, sort of this. I can't even tell you what the Berkshire Hathaway shareholders meetings were like. It was this big orgy of capitalism, 30,000 people in a giant basketball arena, all the stuff that they sell, and they were not pleased to have protesters, because we didn't just show up to their shareholders meeting, we wrecked all their cocktail parties the week before as well. But we were doing protests in Sacramento, Portland. We really got into the direct action piece. We started running big projection cannons, and so we would project images of dead fish on Pacificor's buildings in Portland. With their tagline was "Making it happen." So it'd be like fish killed and making it happen, and ads on buses in Portland. We did a lot of stuff like that. And I think and then we got really up close and personal with the Buffett family. So we started power mapping the Buffett family, who they were related to, what organizations they were involved in, and we really it turns out Warren Buffett has Native American grandchildren. I think they're Ponca. Does that sound right? I heard you say, but Ponca's from, yeah, so I think his daughter married a native guy, and so the kids the Buffett kids are really involved in a bunch of Native American causes, and yet they would not meet with us, and so we just started stalking them. But these are the kinds of things you do to get on people's radar screen. Next slide. And so I'm going to stop after this slide and give it to these guys. So the reason, or what I think is really fun and awesome and effective on Klamath, and is really my philosophy of how you pull off these big things, is the breadth and scope of the coalition has to be commensurate with the size of the problem. So it wasn't just doing protests, right? It wasn't just doing a bunch of scientific studies. It wasn't a couple of press releases. It wasn't a lot. It was all that, right? And we had to figure out how to build a coalition where the lawyers, the scientists, and the grassroots were coordinated. And so we kind of had this core team of folks that was kind of, whatever meeting there was about Klamath, somebody from this core team was kind of involved in coming back, and we were trying to coordinate all these pieces. So like somebody's about to file a lawsuit, I'm like, well, let's make sure that's on the front page of the USA Today, and maybe we get to be on the front page of the USA Today the day of Warren Buffett shareholders meeting, so everybody gets a USA Today outside of their hotel room, sees that they're getting sued by Indians today. So we were starting to do this kind of stuff, but it was a pretty sophisticated strategy. And this is one reason I love working with Indian tribes, because the best scientists in the Klamath River Basin work for the tribes. And so when we ended up in court, which we knew we would, we had the best data. Tribes are fantastic spokespeople. They have this moral high ground that no one else can command. And then you got guys like Sammy who have all this charisma and personality. So that was really good. And then it was like figuring out how you coordinate that with guys like Richard Bruce Collins so that your legal strategy was congruent with all these other pieces. So you got to put the suits, the signs, and the scientists together to be successful. And so I'm going to stop right there and let you talk. How about that?
Well, thank you, Craig. That was awesome. And so next, I'm going to introduce Aisha Gray Wolf Wilson. She's going to come up. She has some slides that they're going to set up on their computer. But I just want to say, Craig was the first man I've ever met with a Southern accent. And I didn't know what to think. And when I first showed up, it was at our high school, and they ordered all these Subway sandwiches, and they didn't think anybody was going to show up to this meeting because the email didn't go out. Well, they said, you guys can come in and you guys can eat whatever you want. So I said, heck yeah, it's our school. So we all sat down at this table and started eating these sandwiches, and all of a sudden it started filling up with these activists that I've heard their names and I've heard what they've done from around, and I heard them talking about all these, all these problems that they're having in organizing and how they're fixing them, and I thought, wow, this is really awesome and exciting. And I said, well, I can help organize people in Klamath. And that's when Craig looked over and he said, who are you? I don't know how to say it, that's how he talks. And I was so shocked. I said, I didn't know what to say. I was like, I'm Sammy Jinsaw, future leader of the Yurok tribe. And then after that, he said, I didn't know what to say. I was trying to stay in the room. But I was in 8th grade at that time. And if you see me, there's me at 15 years old. We did bake sales. Yeah, everything. Yeah, thank you. You can clap for that. That was a lot of work we did. But I'll say a couple more things. I'll just walk through this picture right here of me, and then that below me is what I love, is cooking fish on redwood sticks. It's what our family's been known for generations. I probably cook the best salmon this side of the Mississippi, and that's all the way around the world. Come back to the other side. So I was saying that much. And then right there is my home village. That's who we do it for, in that boat right there. And that's a picture of me in my old canoeing craft. It's a boat that was made in 1955, and it's one of the last canoeing wooden redwood rowboats on the river that's being actively fished out of. And my grandma actually had to flirt with the boat maker to make him come out of retirement. So, so we have a deep, deep connection to these rivers and willing to do anything to see our people do better on these rivers. But I'm going to introduce Aisha, and then we'll have followed up by John Luke, and then I'll do a closing up.
The Klamath River, flowing through Oregon and California, was once home to one of the greatest salmon runs on the West Coast. It was a river full of life, not only for salmon, but for people too. Many tribes have lived along the river since time immemorial, depending on and caring for the river and its abundance. But 4 dams built in the middle of the last century choked the river, harming water quality, killing salmon, and severing cultural connections. For decades, the idea of removing these dams to restore the river's health seemed impossible. Many said it was too ambitious, too complicated, too big. After all, the dams had stood for a long time. They had produced power for the community. But the tribes along the Klamath believed a better future was possible. They held a vision of a clean, healthy, free-flowing river, once again full of salmon, full of life. Grassroots protests kept the river in the spotlight. Eventually, the people along the river came together. They built bipartisan support for river restoration. The dam owner decided that retiring its underperforming dams was in its best economic interest. The energy could be replaced with clean alternatives without contributing to climate change. And now, it's happening. The biggest dam removal and river restoration project the world has ever seen. A time when our politics are polarized and the reality of climate change is daunting, the Klamath presents important lessons. Leadership from tribes and local communities is essential to a future of healthy rivers. And we can overcome seemingly insurmountable challenges and make incredible progress by working together. This is why the Klamath is the River of the Year for 2024.
That was a video that my brother Paul Wilson put together. He's a photographer and does some other little drone footage. Looks like I might have an issue trying to make these bigger, so bear with me. I'll be honest with you guys, I'm not the best at presentations, and Sammy makes it seem so easy, but I struggle with this part of it. But I just wanted to share a little bit about myself and about the people that I come from. First of all, before I share a little bit, I would like to say that we're standing here to celebrate in solidarity with this largest dam removal in history, but at the same time, the upper basin faces a lot of work, and so I hope that we stand in celebration, but also in solidarity, and get ready to take that next step forward. This is me and my son in the top left little picture up there. That's us kayaking at the Wood River wetlands. It's a tributary to the Upper Klamath Lake. This is my 3 times great-grandma, Nancy Phillips, back there, and then Lulu Phillips, Peter, and the rest of our family, Tom Lang, and their Klamath Modoc people. This is on the Upper Klamath Lake in the early 1900s. This is me and my brothers and my dad when I was a little kid. This is my niece and my son at Critter Lake. And these are some photos of me. My mom is super big on tribal politics, and so as a kid, I've been dragged everywhere to all these different meetings, and so I've sat in these meetings, and I'm very thankful to be able to learn so much from those meetings, from those spaces, and also from the people that have been in this fight for decades. Because hearing the side of organizing from Craig, for example, like, that was me, a little kid, at the protest that he's talking about, that they planned. This one was up in Portland at the Pacific Corp one. I have pictures of my niece right here, and that's a sledgehammer in her hands in front of the Keno Dam, JC Bill Dam. And so now we'll be able to redo those pictures with her paddling through that, and not a sledgehammer.
How about the Paddle Travel Waters?
Next. I'll share a little bit about, Paddle Travel Waters is a program, and it's a program that's between Mucklucks Paddle. That's a small paddling club that I co-founded with my brother. Here's our little logo. And then we partnered with Rios to Rivers. It's an international organization that focuses on river stewardship and inspiring the next generation of river stewards. And so Our nonprofit has 3 programs: Paddle Troubled Waters, the only domestic program, and then we have one down in Chile, Kayaking Moon, and then one down in Bolivia, the Amazonian Rivers Initiative. And so all of our programs work to serve and connect all of our indigenous youth and peoples in these basins together to safe to raft out, or can we hear it? Is it going good? Yeah, okay. Paddle Troubled Waters' mission and the idea that it was born from was we have a lot of whitewater kayaking scenes in the basin, but not many tribal people. We couldn't find or list any tribal kayakers. And so my brother had talked to Rush Sturgis. He's a film producer and a professional kayaker. And he chatted with him, and they came up with the idea to train tribal youth from the basin to whitewater kayak. And so since 2022, we have been hosting trainings to prepare these indigenous youth to be able to paddle down Class 5 waters. Our youth just spent 6 weeks down in Chile paddling every single day, 13 indigenous youth from the basin. And we partnered with a private high school, World Class Academy. And so what we did was we sent them to this accredited high school, but we got to design all of our own curriculum and all of our own plans and everything about it. And so all of our youth spent that time down there, and right now they're currently kayaking, and they're spending 7 weeks in the Pacific Northwest. They just spent 2 weeks up towards University of Oregon, Eugene, Mackenzie River, Willamette River, and then they'll travel to the Smith, to the Rogue, and to the Klamath River.
They sort of recharge, so.
Okay, I think that, yeah. So next summer, our cohort of indigenous youth will be able to safely paddle down some of these big waters and go all the way to the ocean from the upper basin. And that is my niece, that's one of the students in that program. And the idea behind Rios Rivers and the exchanges in the Klamath Basin started with our work in 2017, and that's when I met Sammy and his brothers. And so we did a rafting trip down the Klamath and then went down to Patagonia. And so that kind of sparked the interaction with Rios in the Klamath. While I absolutely love everything about Paddle Troubled Waters, it's my heart, it's what my brother had envisioned, it's my family, my niece, you know, it's everything. But at the same time, my heart is where my home is, and Paddle Troubled Waters is a regional program. And we're talking about the whole basin. And I know we got to talk about the whole basin, but my heart is just really stuck on Klamath-Modoc territories. And so when we look at this map right here, this whole upper area is all us. And so the lower basin, it's all those tribes combined, but this is all Klamath-Modoc peoples and our Paiute peoples up here. And so we had a land base of 23 million acres. And we went from being a people of 23 million acres to less than 5,000 acres that our tribal people are not allowed to access. And so it's something that is just very difficult to kind of wrap your head around. And Wixkini, it means Klamath peoples of the lakes. And we have Crater Lake, one of the 7 wonders of the world. We have Agency Lake, Upper Klamath Lake, Lower Klamath Lake, Tule Lake, Lake Iguana, Clear Lake. We have all these lake systems. And now the only lake that exists is Upper Klamath Lake. Everything else is gone. All of it has been drained. And so it's just very difficult when we think about this stuff, because all the things that they have done to our water and to our land, the manipulation of it, they have done to our people as well. And so when we look at history and the first contact, we start to see the same types of events when disease hits. It's the same time irrigators began ranching. It's the same time 2,000 head of cattle moved into the basin. In 1927, we had 2 boarding schools on a reservation, and 12 of our Klamath girls, ages like 12 to 17, they burned it down. And from that time, our people were sent out of our area. We weren't allowed to be at home anymore. And that same year was when our drought period began. And we were in drought for 10 years in that period. And so if we look at all these things, termination, during the Termination Act, our tribe was targeted along with 5 other tribes and all the tribes in California, Texas, and New York, because we sat on the resources that the government wanted. And so us, along with those other 5 tribes and a handful of other tribes, were terminated in the 50s. And so you're seeing our 23 million acres of land completely gone. You know, overnight they had decided the Klamaths are not going to have their land base is too valuable for them to have. And so the same time we see that termination is the same time we start to see the decline in our fish species, the chom and koptu. I don't know if any of you guys have heard about chom and koptu, but they're endemic species. And so that means they exist only in one place in the whole entire world, nowhere else. And this is a picture of them right here. And then this is a picture of them being dried in the early 1900s. And so in the early 1900s, like 1900, some mills and stores in Klamath Falls, they started to sell canned schwalm. And then 60 years later, we were terminated. And the same time we were terminated, the species started to declining in population. In 1971, they were recognized as endangered and threatened by California law. And that's the same year that we start seeing all these other water negotiations and these other irrigation actions. And it's just a continuous parallel history, timeline of what has happened to our water, our people, and the same with it. It's all interconnected. And I just wanted to share that little bit with you guys because we're standing here and we're talking about bringing the salmon home, and it's just very hard as a Klamath person to stand here and hear this because we lost salmon 100+ years ago, and we've been fighting and fighting to protect our chom and our koptu, and they're rapidly declining. They're on their way out. And for the last 53 years, our federal, state, and tribal governments have recognized that. And for the last 53 years, we have failed to step up and adequately protect them. And so the Upper Klamath Lake, all of our water drains into that, and then it was supposed to originally go down 5 miles into Lake Ewana, and Lake Ewana would move over to Lower Klamath Lake, and then that would move over to Tule Lake, and it was all this marshland, and then it would eventually start the Klamath River. When you have a water system that's just so unique, we're a reverse watershed, and we have all of our cold springs up here. We have all these endemic species. We have mare's eggs. That's only 2 places in the world, Japan and in the Upper Klamath Lake springs. And then we have our chom and our koptu, and we have our salmon. And then they cut this whole part of our system. And this is what they cut out right here, a zoomed in version. And they drained it all. And then they believe that if we do one thing and we remove our dams, that's going to fix our river, but there's this whole missing part of our system that's gone. And that's something that we need to address. We can't only address our river and we can't only address those dams, but we need to address where the rest of our water is being diverted and what's happening to that water. And so in the summertime, I live in Chiloquin, and I drive to Klamath Falls, and it's not much, like Craig said, it is not much, but in the summertime, they tell us you're not allowed to water anything outside, you're not allowed to wash your laundry during these days, you're not allowed to use your water for anything other than human consumption, and if we catch you during these periods that they send these notices out, then you're getting these fees, you're getting fines, and we have to live our lives like this in Chiloquin. As tribal people, we're told, certain sides of the town, you get certain days to water. When I drive to Klamath Falls, I have to drive past these mass, lush fields of irrigated land. And so I'm sitting at home thinking I'm not allowed to give my dog water or I'll face fines. I'm not allowed to wash my laundry, but they drown and they pump all of our water out, and they don't say anything. They don't care about just the people, about the existence of our lives, of our fish or anything. So I want to share some of that with you. And the top left picture is of Wokus, and you see the Wokus in the background of this picture on the Klamath Marsh as well. And Wokus was our superfood, and so a lot of our lower tribes, their foods are like acorns that they hold very precious to their hearts. Ours was water lilies, and so when it's in that seed form before it blooms into a flower, we take them and we dry them and we eat those. And Schwam and Wokus are two of our most important like identities as Klamath Modoc peoples. And not only do we not have any water in our lake, so water quantity, but the water quality is so poor that even 30 miles down from where the water comes out of the ground so fresh that we still drink it, it's so toxic that our food, we don't feel safe eating it. We don't feel like, how could we eat our food that is filled with neurotoxin waters that they tell us don't touch the water? And it's the same water that they irrigate all of our food with. And so these are just like some connections where this is what we're facing at the headwaters. And so the reason I'm like, it feels like a crisis, because this is what we're seeing firsthand, and we've lost our fish, we've lost our ceremonies, we've lost so much, and we continue to lose so much. But the outside world doesn't see that all the time. They see like fighting and whatnot, but I feel like a lot of the times it's not talked about. And when the Klamath tribes do come to the table, the fact that even though we were terminated, we were restored in the 80s, but when we were restored, we had no land base with that. And so that means it's very limited. We have the government and we have private landowners that have that seat at the table with us. And so during the KBRA, the Klamath Basin Restoration Agreements, that's an example of, we came to the table and the Klamath tribes are often isolated from the rest of our basin because we don't have land, but we clung on to our water rights. And so we have the right to hunt, gather, and fish, and the water needs to support that. So that means that our water should support our chwam, our koptu, our water lilies, that is our agriculture. But we don't. And so during KBRA, they try to negotiate the Klamath tribe's water rights away in return for water sufficient for our fish. And that was a constant debate, and it caused a division between our tribe and the lower tribes because our tribe did not believe we had to give up our rights that protected the little bit of our existence in the upper Klamath Basin in return for the rest of us to have, for the Yurok to have fish. That was what it was. The government had pinned the Klamath tribes against the Yurok, the Karuk, and the Hupa. And so then it causes a whole other division, and it's not that one is better than the other or one deserves more than the other, but it's the fact that we all are interconnected. It's one big system, and we have to act accordingly. And so what happens at the headwaters has to be on the radar of the Yurok, Karuk, and Hupas, and we have to be in conversation about that. Here's some pictures of some dams. I'm sorry, I'm not the best at talking. It makes me feel so uncomfortable. But before I give the mic away, I wanted to share a little bit about, I'm super passionate about environmental work and whatever it means to protect our water. The reason I feel so tied to it is I love the place I come from, and I've always been taught that. And my father has raised me out in these woods, but one example is, even though we don't have much Wokus, I've grown up my whole life getting Wokus as a kid on our marshes. This last summer, I went to take my son, and all of our marshes were completely dry. And so I was like, within my lifetime, I'm 21 years old, within my lifetime, I've watched our trees get clear cut, and that broke my heart when I was 16. I watched them cut all of our forests down, and now I'm watching all of our water dry up. And I'm not able to share the little piece I have with my son, and that breaks my heart. And so whatever I do is working towards sharing what I got to have with my baby, so that way he can have that. And so, although they drained all of our water, we have 2 critical water sources, the Klamath Marsh and the Upper Klamath Lake, and that's all we got left. And so it's right here. And currently there's 2 projects that our Upper Klamath Basin is being threatened by. There's a project called the Swan Lake Pumped Hydro Project, and it's about 20 miles from the Upper Klamath Lake. And so while they're removing 4 dams on our river, they're planning to build 2 massive pumps to pump all of our water out of our ground and fill it, send it up a ridge, and then put it back to a transmission line to send electricity to California. The reason that this is so bad is since 2001, our county has been in extreme drought. So usually we see very dry periods, drought, and then we see wet years, and it goes back and forth, it fluctuates. It has yet to fluctuate. We're still in extreme drought, and we're still diverting and irrigating water, and we're still watching our species die, and we're still watching all this loss. But the Swan Lake Pumped Hydro will pump what water we have left out of our aquifers and out of existing wells, and they will fill these 2 massive cement pits. And this site sits on 200 plus prayer sites of Klamath peoples. And so that means our rocks and all of our stuff, because it was like a main migration route type of place that Klamath people would travel through. And so we have a whole bunch of sites, and it's also right next to Nelox. It's one of our freshwater springs, and so during the summertime we have mass algae blooms, and when that all dies and goes to the bottom of our lake, it takes all that oxygen out of the water columns, and so our little fishies suffocate in the water, and they have to go to these springs on the sides of our lakes to be able to try to survive throughout that summertime. And so this Swan Lake Pumped Hydro Project will sit 11 miles from this one of the very few springs that our fish have left to be able to survive in the summertime. And then this company is also an international franchise corporation that has came in. And so they have bought out all of our private landowners, and then they have also came to the Klamath tribes and continue to try to push our tribe to sign a $40 million agreement that would state all of our tribal immunity, tribal sovereignty, and everything is out the window. We sign that away. And then also, if there's any tribal person that happens to die at any of the project sites, that the rye development is absolved of all responsibility. And also, if we sign this agreement and we accept $40 million, if any tribal person from the Klamath tribes is to come out and speak adversely against the project publicly, we have to pay the $40 million back, and we're paying all the court and legal fees for that. And then another little small addition is if any of the partners in this corporation with this project get in trouble legally, we have to go to bat and protect them in court, and pay in financially for that protection as well. And so the reason I wanted to share that with you guys is, woohoo, the dams are being removed, but that does not mean you place a pumped hydro facility right next to the Upper Klamath Lake that we're trying to protect. So that way we're fighting for these salmon to come home, but to come home to what? To come home to water that they can't breathe in, to come home to no water. And so I wanted to share that's one project that we continue to go back and forth, and we have the Klamath Tribe's general membership has told our council that you are not allowed to go into negotiation with rye development any longer. And our council has failed to listen, and so our tribal government has also failed to protect us. And they continue to negotiate our rights away. For $40 million, that rye development has defined how we spend that money as well. The other project I want to share about is the Klamath Marsh landfill. And so Upper Klamath Lake is one of our most critical sources. The second is the Klamath Marsh. And so that is right up here. And Side note, sorry. The Swan Lake Pumped Hydro Project, it started in the early mid-2000s, and they thought that it was completely stopped. And so then it had just quieted down. Oregon Wild and other nonprofits had laid off of it. And then 2019, FERC had approved all of its licensing, and then they've got all their other state permits. And so right now it's in pre-construction phase as of 2021. I wanted to share that with you guys because I know you guys know the legalities of some stuff. And so right now they have yet to start construction, and we believe that it has something to do with the fact that the Klamath tribes refuses to sign any agreements.